And he is one of the greatest soil scientists from Sri Lanka, known to the international world. In the process of, before joining the Department of Agriculture, he has been interviewed by none other than some of the great agriculture like Dr. Rind as the Director of Agriculture, and at that time also Dr. Joachim, who was a great chemist. Just a minute, some things are appearing on my screen as well. When Dr. Abeyratne became the Director of Agriculture, Dr. Panabokke became the Deputy Director of Agriculture in charge of agriculture research. Dr. Panabokke later became the Director of Agriculture in 1978 and remained as one of the greatest directors till 1982. He decided to retire as the Director of Agriculture in 1982 at the age of 55, leaving room for the next succession to take leadership. It was Dr. Panabokke who single-handed encouraged me to do my postgraduate studies with the support of the secretary, late Mr. Ranjan Wijeyaratne, when my own supervisor was not very supportive at that time. After his retirement as the Director of Agriculture, he was quickly absorbed to the International Service for Natural Agricultural Research, ISNA, Hague, Netherlands, and he worked there for a few years. His next engagement was the International Irrigation Management Institute, IMI, which is now known as the International Water Management Institute, and Sri Lanka is hosting their main office. This is Dr. Panabokke, who is known to most of the members who have joined from the Department of Agriculture. And the then director, of course, I just mentioned about his directorship. A very simple man. This is his table as the Director of Agriculture. We used to call him the Tab. He was a technocrat, he was an aristocrat, and he was also a bureaucrat. So we used to call him a Tab. Of course, Tab today is different to the Tab at that time. Of course, this Tab was coined quite recently for him because of his character. If you can notice that his chair was a very ordinary chair as the Director of Agriculture. Today, if you go to that room, there is a chair. Above your head is the back part of the chair. And as you can see on his table is a standard leather bag, which most public servants carried, which was 42 rupees at that time from the central stores. And as you can see, it was a very simple table, but what he did on this table and from this table were of great significance. Dr. Panabokke was actually who associated him during our professional careers, know him with this outlook in the field as he became a senior scientist. He and his professional colleagues and later Director of Agriculture before Dr. Panabokke, Dr. Ernest Abeyratne from the 5th lane, Kollupitiya, were both scientists who were barefooted in Mahayulupallama. As you know, they did not wear shoes into the field, particularly the paddy fields. You see, this was very well known to most of them. And in fact, later on, quite a number of, even up to Dr. Dhanapala, they were all barefooted scientists following these gurus. Now, the dry zone agriculture station, Mahayulupallama, was a brainchild of Dr. Ernest Abeyratne with ardent support from Dr. Panabokke. So this it still remains as one of the greatest research stations in Mahayulupallama. So these are all contributions made by these great people. This is Dr. Panabokke that we remember in the early 21st century and late 20th century. Of course, he was a very simple man, but if you look at this face, we still have a little bit of fear. You know, we take one foot back to see this Dr. Panabokke, who was our guru. That's the kind of respect and charisma that he carried. But he was one of the most lovable people. He had an absolute warm heart to anybody and everybody and supported everyone to their research, to do the agriculture and whatnot, everything he did. And also he was very concerned about the families of the agricultural officers and their children as well. Of course, this is a picture, I understand, from Australia, shared by one of his daughters. And His life was water, agriculture, and soils, as you know, and of course, the man who did so much for these things. As a director of agriculture, just a minute, let me cut this off. He spent most of his time visiting farmers, agriculture research stations, and farms around the country, right? He was one man who decided and gave decisions on the spot where his decisions were required. He didn't wait for letters. He didn't wait for officers to come to his room. He was regularly in the field. And of course, today is the quite contrary. Today, almost, I remember one of the recent directors of Botanic Gardens, Mr. Nanayakara, told me that he had to almost travel to Colombo every day for meetings. And he went and spent his time the whole day and comes back. Next day, he had another meeting. When he comes back to Peradeniya, there was a call for another ministry's meeting. But I'll tell you, so Dr. Panabokke was a leader with the first-hand management by walking around kind of experience, right? And a concept later developed by the American management systems. In fact, in our training of management systems by DARP project and so on, MBWA was one of the big stories which was practiced by our own gurus, our own leaders like Dr. Panabokke and Dr. Abeyratne and so on and so forth. He worked at the Botanic Gardens, Haggal, during his tenure as the Deputy Director of Agriculture and then as a director. Right. What was very interesting was he would visit most of us at any time. We were young scientists and he would visit us at any time of the day. And he was very happy to see us in the field. He encouraged us a lot and supported us in every way. Now, what was very interesting was the office of the curator of the Botanic Gardens, Haggala, was a part of the bungalow. It was just one room in the bungalow. Now, Dr. Panabokke, anytime he did his field visits to Bandarawela or Nuwara, he used to always end up at the circuit bungalow, Haggala, because there was another very interesting story, because the bungalow keeper at that time, Nandasiri, was his bungalow keeper at Mahilupallam. For some political reason, he was punished and he was sent to Haggala. So Dr. Panabokke had huge sympathy on Nandasiri, and every time he went anywhere there, he ended up in Haggala Circuit Bungalow. And of course, he would come to the bungalow maybe around 8 o'clock in the night, and he would do a wash. And the next thing he did was, he used to always walk with Nandasiri to my bungalow, and he used to always see me in my office in the bungalow. So that may be 9 o'clock in the night, and he was one of the happiest directors, scientists, to see young people like us working at that time. We did all our scientific work at that time. This story is not only for me. Dr. Jinisira Fernando said the same thing. Even Dr. Dhanapala said the same thing. So most of these people had this kind of encounters with Dr. Panabokke, and we worked for Dr. Panabokke than anybody else because he was such an influence on us. He was our greatest mentor. The Secretary of Agriculture at that time was late Mr. Ranjan Wijeyaratne. He too was a field-oriented great planter and an agriculturist. Between both of them, agriculture and agriculture productivity of Sri Lanka flourished, and they made it a self-sufficient country. Unlike recent times, Dr. Panabokke refused to attend meetings in Colombo, and he went to Colombo for one day, and all meetings like irrigation department, agriculture, agrarian services, anything, he would just attend only one day. He would not budge an inch and would not attend any meetings on any other day. All other 4 days, or that matter, actually, even the weekends, he used to be traveling to farms and research stations. His family was very interesting. His wife was Seemanti Madugalle from a well-known Kandyan family. He seemed to have met her for the first time at Mahilupallam when she and her colleagues as students of agriculture school visited Mahilupallam research station. It is very interesting. I think this was a love at first sight. That's what we heard, and that that we can understand, because they were a loving couple. They had 3 daughters, Aruni, Renuka, and Himandri. I hope Renuka is listening to this talk. And Renuka was eyed by a lot of young agriculturists in the department, but unfortunately, nobody could reach that family because they were mortally scared of Dr. Panabokke's look through the glasses. So most of the agriculture, young, brilliant people who are now professors and PhDs lost Renuka because of the worry they had to Dr. Panabokke. His wife and the eldest daughter, Aruni, passed away on the 20th of October. His wife passed away in October 2020 in Colombo, and Aruni passed away on the 19th of April in 2021 in Australia. Shalini is here. The daughter is here joining us. Renuka is one of our good friends, married to Mr. Kobbekadua, and lives and works in Kandy. A lovely lady involved in a lot of social work, and they have joined something like Inner Wheel Club of Kandy, and they do a lot of work in Kandy. Of course, Himandri, I understand, is now in Canada and not in Australia, although I have marked it Australia here. She never got married. I don't think she got married later on either. She lives in Canada, I understand. Of course, most of you would have not seen this picture. This is the young Chris Panabokke and Miss Madugalle. This is their wedding photograph, and they got married immediately after he returned from his PhD in 1956. I'm sure the love affair would have been there long before that. And of course, this is the Panabokke couple that most of us have seen, Semanthini, and these are the 80s and 90s. We used to see them in this kind of picture. They were a very loving couple. He was a very witty man. Although we were so scared of him, he used to come out with very interesting jokes, which I sometimes don't intend putting in a public speech of this nature. Now, of course, this is Simanthi Mrs. Panabokke. She passed away 3 years ago on the 28th of October 2020. She was a lovely lady, always with a smile, and a very welcoming lady. And of course, we used to, as the director of the Botanical Gardens, we used to walk into his house in just to cut the grass and things like that. We used to send the workers and go there. She was such a lovely lady. She used to give these people food and give tea, and also she had such a lovely kind of personality. Of course, she herself was an agriculturist, so she knew more agriculture than the workers who walked into that house. She always farmed herself and grew a lot of vegetables at home and so on. Of course, this is the family of Dr. Panabokke. I'm sure, just a minute. The 3 daughters are there. I think, Simant, you are here, I think, in this picture. That's Dr. Panabokke. That's his husband. This is Renuka. This is Himandri. And this is Renuka's husband. And of course, this was the whole family of Dr. Panabokke. So most of you will recognize Dr. Panabokke and his short sleeve shirts and, this kind of outlook of Dr. Panabokke. The 3 girls are here, as you can see on the right on this picture is the eldest daughter. And then, of course, this is Himandri, the youngest one. We used to call him the boy, the Kolla, right? And this is Renuka. She is still a lovely lady in Kandy, very much loved by most of the friends and so on. Very down-to-earth lady. She had the fortune of looking after the father towards the last stages. In fact, about a week or 2 before he passed away, we were on a Inner Wheel Club trip to the 9 Arches by train. We had quite a lot of people joining in that, and in fact, Renuka enjoyed treating the father, talking to the people who looked after the father more than the trip. It was really, we were really touched by her commitment to take care of the father who was in Colombo at that time. Every half an hour or 1 hour, she used to call the nephew and the people who took care of them. And also she spoke to doctors quite a lot. Now, because I was seated quite near to them, and my wife, they are all good friends. So we were listening. And in fact, my wife said, see this girl's luck. She's so careful. She's so caring. She's able to look out to the father, although he was in 97, I think, when he passed away. So that's the very lucky, very fortunate thing. You can see that in her face. Very fortunate, Hariping Vantamunak. So that's the one that Renuka carries. And of course, apart from all those things, now this is another picture of Dr. Panabokke, one thing that he has taken. This is a Kaurupita guyanensis plant that still exists in one of the historic temples in Pusulpitiya. This Pusulpitiya Rajamaha Vihara. Now, Pusulpitiya Rajamaha Vihara is one of the historic temples where one of the 32 saplings, that is Palabodhi, is planted and still living. Now, the high priest of this temple was his Lokuappachi, his father's elder brother. So he used to visit this place. He was, apparently, this tree is one of the trees that he loved. Now, when you talk about trees, it was very interesting and very challenging for people like us, because whenever he was in the field, he would call us and ask for the names of trees in different places. Now, I think not only me, I think Dr. Magdan Jayasuriya probably would have been consulted by Dr. Panabokke at that time to get the names of trees. He was such a lover of the combination of soil type, water, the dry zones, the intermediate zones, and wet zones. He was very familiar with the vegetation as well. Where he connected all these things to the water tables, the soil types, and kind of thing. And he was a great scientist with a very wide knowledge of nature. So that encouraged us to keep thinking, and so much so, we feel that it will be very difficult for the rebirth of another Panabokke with all those combinations of all natural resources. All natural resources, our vegetation, our living organisms, water, and earth. So these four, he was one person who was so conversant, which led to some of the great works that he produced. These are some of the pictures of his international connections. He used to go visit these seminars, and he was one man who took the next available flight back home. He never stayed even one day sightseeing. This is what he told me, because we as young scientists always stayed another day or two just to look around and do a bit of shopping. But Dr. Panabokke, I don't think ever did that. So these are, of course, few other pictures. You can see serious Dr. Panabokke on here, and he would listen to every word. But of course, he would contest any scientist of any level, because everybody learned from him about the 14 types of soils that were here in Sri Lanka. This is Dr. Panabokke was also actively involved in communication on these things too, with for agriculture groups and so on. This is one of those pictures where he was involved in Sri Lanka, you see, with Radio Ceylon, and later on in many other media. He advised a lot of people on kind of agriculture practices and things like that. So this is the kind of work of Dr. Panabokke. This is a publication that he made. Now, one of the everlasting and the greatest contributions of Dr. Panabokke is the agroecological regions of Sri Lanka map. Now, this is valid up to date. And what was most interesting was there were no major great equipment to do this. So what he did was he plotted this map with the help of all the agricultural research officers. He himself had his own collection of data, right, which he recorded himself. And of course, when this agriculture map was done, which was It was done by the help of all the scientific staff, and he did it by hand. And what was very, very interesting was that, of course, I'll tell you about that. The agroecological region represents a uniform agroclimate, soils and terrain conditions as such would support a particular farming system where a certain range of crops and farming practices find their best expression. Now, this is the evolution of what are called cropping patterns and cropping systems. So that's one thing that emerged during the time of Dr. Panabokke. People like Dr. Shukrajapati, and these people worked hard on these cropping patterns and cropping systems and farming systems and did a great job. And of course, Dr. Panabokke identified certain areas like IL2. I'll tell you what these areas are. Agroic regions in the intermediate zone of low country to be the best suited for food crops and sugarcane compared to other agroecological regions in the country. He declared that the higher diurnal temperature, that means the night and day, the difference between the temperatures between day and night, promotes the increased sugar contents, or what's called the Brix value of the fruit crops, which make fruits much sweeter in taste than grown on other agroecological regions. These areas are Padiyatala, Bibila, and extending up to Polonnaruwa. If you buy fruits from these areas, you will find that those fruits have much higher sugar value. So for those who are diabetic, be careful, because the sugar content of the fruits collected from these areas are higher. But of course, Dr. Panabokke went on to mention that if you cut certain fruits from these areas, you might be able to, at a particular time, you might be able to see almost sugar crystals inside the fruits. So such was the, so if you grow things like watermelon in the other areas, you can still have watermelon. But what is called, they are all kind of watery. But in watermelon from these areas will be very, very sweet. So these are things that you should, in fact, if you really look towards the sugarcane cultivations, you can see Kantale and those areas, sugarcane was selected not by these things, but they justify Dr. Panabokke's findings and subsequent recommendations for cultivation. Of course, as you know, quite subsequently, politicians started growing crops all over, thinking that they can make, they are the heroes, but they never listen to these great people like Dr. Panabokke. So during the compilation of this particular map in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Dr. Panabokke did not have any sophisticated equipment and analytical tools such as GIS that we use today. He collected information based on his own observations, as well as information he collected regularly through all research and field staff of the Department of Agriculture. This map was constructed and compiled through one of the most loyal and reliable cartographers of that time, who worked with Dr. Panabokke, Vijay Singh, the TMK Vijay Singh. He still lives, and I hope he's listening to this talk, because he's one of the people who really contributed a lot to Dr. Panabokke's construction of this map. He should be honored as one of the great people. This map is being widely used in agriculture and natural resource management professionals and remains. Right now, there is a discussion going on whether the climatic regions have changed, because due to deforestation and so on and so forth. So there are efforts to review this. But I think the work done by Dr. Panabokke is so great. I hope whatever the map that comes up, the types of soils will not change. The rain patterns might change. Probably the times of rains might change, right? The climatic conditions might not change overall over the year, because the northeast monsoons and southwest monsoons will remain almost somewhere there. Quite honestly, this is the northeast monsoon time. It has still not come. 15th of October, it should have come, but we received rain long before that. Now, there is floods in the south. Southwest monsoon rains are still there, kind of intermonsoons. it should not have been there. So these kind of changes have come up. So there is a scientific discussion that is going on by people like subsequent Director Generals of Agriculture, like Dr. Ajantari Silva and Mr. Dr. Punyawardena, who was at the NRMC. I hope they will study this long enough before they can think of a new construction of these maps. We would like to congratulate them for their thinking, but I think it will be a long-term research, because Dr. Panabokke's knowledge gathering was so many years of experience and collection of data before he constructed this map. One of his first publication was in 1961. This is Soils of Ceylon. It was a FAO publication with the government of Ceylon. You can see the Ceylon emblem at that time was the colonial time emblem. So that's the first one. And one of his subsequent books that became very popular, The Soils of Ceylon and Fertilizer Use, by Dr. C.R. Panabokke in 1968. And the Soils and Agroecological Environment of Ceylon by Dr. Panabokke, the center one. And Groundwater Conditions of Sri Lanka. This was something very, very interesting. In fact, one of the findings of Dr. Panabokke, which I could not read, he discussed this even with us a lot. I'm sure Dr. Magdan Jayasuriya would have been involved in these discussions, because the dry zone water was, we used to call it fluoride-rich water. But then Dr. Panabokke was the one who said, no, fluoride is there, but the pattern of fluoride water in the dry zone is a mosaic pattern. And he was trying to plot it. I think Dr. Magdan Jayasuriya was also consulted during this time. I am not too sure whether he was able to plot that dry zone fluoride water mosaic pattern, but he did recognize that the fluoride water was in a mosaic pattern and not all over, because most of the dry zone children who get this whitening of teeth was due to fluoride, as most of you are aware. And this pattern, he said, was due to a particular pattern. Now, I was born in Anuradhapura. I never had these white teeth, which means, and in fact, we drank water from the wells.
No,
so that's the kind of thing that we have.
1 minute.
So this is, so anyway, these are some of the things that are very interesting. Upon my return from UK, and even before I went to UK, I consulted Dr. Panabokke, because one of the most important historic things of Sri Lanka is the sacred bow tree, which is historic, which is 2,663 years old. And I was working at the Peradeniya Gardens. I did realize that it was getting some massive nutrient problem. So I consulted Dr. Panabokke at that time when he was still the Director of Agriculture. And he said, we'll have to make a study. And of course, I was lucky enough when I was at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, where lots of historic trees are there. And the Kew scientists look after these trees. I opted to work with these historic trees for 3 months. And I gathered a lot of knowledge at that time. And upon my return, I dug quite a lot of these things. And Dr. Panabokke had retired by that time, but he still guided us and gave me Dr. S. Somasiri and Deepa Gangoda, who was his personal assistant, to work on these soils. And of course, we did these things and found, we did a lot of work and then found that Dr. Panabokke mentioned that he quickly recognized the affinities of bow trees to a reddish-brown earth was consolidated. So scientists drew up a recommendation that the bow trees' preferred RB was assumed to be nearest perfect. So then, of course, certain other people like Dr. Jinsiri Fernando, who was the Director of Agriculture at that time, Deputy Director of Research, he got involved in this thing. Dr. Somasiri got involved in it, and Mr. Gangoda were involved with me. And then we dug these things 9 feet down and looked at all these soils. And we collected samples of naturally growing bow trees in and around natural forest and near natural forest and drew up this pattern completely. And then we collected 42 tractor loads of soil and filled it. Now, this is the picture of the oldest historic tree of Sri Lanka, the Jasima Bhathiya. And this is a pit which was 9 feet deep, which we dug, and we found that most of these are sandy soils. All these are sandy, and although they look brown, they were very sandy over a period of time. From the time of Kim Devanam Petis, this has been receiving Valley Puja hours, which means sand offerings, and the whole place of field is in fact, in 1911, there have been a lot of branch collapses, which would have been due to these factors. Then, of course, with the recommendations of Dr. Panabokke and his contributions, this is Mr. Gangoda, and this is the Atamasthanaadhipati in 1985. We dug, and this is a symbolic time where we put the new soil into this, and we completely renovated the Sri Mahabodhi Udamaluva in 1985. In fact, we undertook another change just recently, and that's what we did. So this is the great work of Dr. Panabokke for his soils, for his other things, and these are the things that I thought of sharing with the group today. And of course, one of the other most important things is the Rakaganno, for his love of his nature, trees, soils, and water. So here are the things that he did. And of course, he joined hands with Desamanya Airangani Serasinghe and Kamani Vitaran, the sister, putting together Rakaganno in 1975. Did great work. And I remember Dr. Panabokke asking me at the time of JR's time, there were a lot of Araucaria trees planted some time ago, and somebody was trying to cut down. It was JR who said no, but I think it was Airangani who said no, we'll have to have a look at it. So I had to go and study these 18 trees and give a report to JR at that time. So there was a lot of work being done in Colombo, and also, as you mentioned, as the summary mentioned earlier, the protection of the Singharaja was significant work of Rakaganno led by this group. Of course, these two figures, of course, this is Airangani Serasinghe a few years ago, and this is Kamani Vitarana, the sister, who was also a few years ago. Of course, I didn't have recent pictures. I saw the daughter of Kamani in the visitors list. So this is what I thought I better share with the life of Dr. Chris Panabokke. But this, I must say, is a very brief one. If I were to talk about his soil work and research work, about 80 scientific papers, about 30 internationally recognized papers, and all the research stations he started and encouraged, all the PhDs, some 800 odd PhDs that he encouraged into the Department of Agriculture, was all his work, his supported work. So we were benefited by this great scientist. Anyway, we lost him. It's very unlikely that we will have another similar person for another decade or two. So anyway, I shall stop now, leaving a few minutes for discussion. And this is let me first of all thank you, Desmani Arangani Serasinghe, Professor Shirani Balasuriya, and the colleagues at Rakaganno for inviting me to give this brief presentation on our guru, late Dr. Chris Panabokke. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bhathiya. Very educative, lots of learning, and especially to know that Dr. Panabokke did so much. In contemporary times, he was obviously not known, like an unsung hero. He is now looking at what you have said. Of course, he got the title of Deshamania, and also Vidya Jyoti Deshamania, and also he was the chancellor of the Sabaragamu University, I believe. So if there are any questions, Aisha, are there any questions in the chat box, or
we don't yet have any questions?
Right, and as we are behind time as well, I will now invite Shalini Lawson, who is in Sydney, Australia, Dr. Panabokke's granddaughter, to give a tribute to her grandfather. Shalini.
Thanks, Uncle. Hi, everybody. My name is Shalini. I'm Chris Panabokke's granddaughter. I live in Sydney, Australia, and I'm the daughter of his first daughter, Aruni. I've just got a few images to share, so I'll just share my screen. Bear with me one moment. Can you all see my screen?
Yes,
Yes,
we can.
we do.
Thank you. All right, so firstly, I'd just like to thank you all for inviting me to share with you all a personal tribute to Dr. Chris Panabokke, who was my grandfather, or Atta, as we affectionately called him, and he was the beloved patriarch of our family. He was one of 12 children, the oldest of the Panabokke family in Kandy. He was married to the late Simanthini Panabokke and had 3 daughters, including my mother, Aruni Senivaratna, who was the oldest, Renuka Kopekadua and Himadri Panabokke. And between my granddad and my grandmother, they had 4 grandchildren, Krishan and Shivani Kopekadua, my brother Jehan Senivaratna, and myself. So our Atta was someone who our family really admired for his personal contributions to science and the numerous accomplishments that he had. He was somebody that really encouraged us to pursue our own success. But we'll also remember him for his charm, for his witty humor, for his keen sense of adventure, and also in amongst all of his professional pursuits, he made sure to spend quality time with us as we grew up over the years. So in the next few minutes, I'll just share some insights into the personal life that he had and pay tribute to the man he was and who we will always fondly remember him for. So Atta, my grandfather, was well beyond his years in how he was always impeccably dressed, how he boldly presented himself and confidently socialized with peers and dignitaries from all around the world. He was known for his energetic and engaging storytelling and enjoyed hosting and entertaining his peers, family, and friends. He was a loyal husband and father, and I will personally always respect the fact that Atta gave his wife, my grandmother Simi, full credit for supporting him to raise their family and dutifully to be by his side to help him contribute to the science field as he did. They were a loving couple who traveled the world together, and they worked really hard to give their children and grandchildren a happy and comfortable life. He was an inspiring grandfather to myself, my brother Jehan, and my cousins Krishan and Shivani. On a personal note, as I mentioned earlier, he was a really hands-on grandfather. He celebrated our births, our birthdays, our awards, our achievements, and he frequently visited my brother and I in Australia. He would call the 4 of us grandchildren his chillin's chillin', and he would encourage us to come and sit near Grandpa to exchange stories and to entertain us. The one thing that he and I both shared was a love for stationery. I remember his desk would always be perfectly organized with pens and highlighters and pencils and rulers, and I'd often bring him some cool new pens from Australia on my many trips to visit, which he was always delighted to receive. He was a natural leader and a teacher. He took time beyond his personal pursuits to educate us grandchildren and our generation of extended family members on his passion for soil sciences. He shared his books with us. He showed us his many maps that he had been involved in the design of. And in particular, I have a fond memory of him taking myself and my cousin Krishan and Shivani to a water tank in Sri Lanka to experience some of the academic research work that he had contributed to. On a global scale, our grandfather was very well recognized. Amongst the spectrum of scientific scholars, political figures, international leaders that he had met over the years, some of you may know his very famous story of the tree planting ceremony in Peradeniya Gardens, where he met the Queen and Prince Philip, and how he was very dismayed that when Prince Philip disrespectfully dropped the tree sapling into the hole that was dug out, my grandfather often recalled that he cast a very stern, disapproving look at the Queen, and he claims that the Queen nodded and acknowledged that she also was disappointed in the way that Prince Philip dropped the sapling into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a special experience for my family and myself to visit this tree in 2019 at Peradeniya Gardens, and take a photo to take back to my grandfather to show him how the tree had grown since 1981, so 38 years later. And he was so delighted to see the tree, and he could fondly recall that tree planting incident like it was just yesterday. He was also a lover of food and wine. One of my grandfather's guilty pleasures was chocolate, afternoon snacks, and a glass of sherry. On our many trips to Sri Lanka, he would always be delighted to receive a bag of mini Mars bars, and he would hide them away in his fridge and have the discipline to eat only one chocolate every day. And he would enjoy a glass of sherry in the evening with my grandmother. He was very fortunate to have a wife who was an absolutely amazing cook, and he thoroughly enjoyed her meals, and she passed on her ability to cook to my mother as well, which we are very grateful for. My grandfather was someone who absorbed himself with news, radio, current affairs, books, scientific journals, and he inspired us all to follow our own professional pursuits. Between his children and grandchildren, we've all moved into professions such as business management, marketing, product design, teaching, IT, legal, and medicine, which we know that he was proud of all of our achievements. My grandfather was a world traveler. He was somebody that appreciated the beauty of the world and loved to travel all around the globe and absorb himself in new cultures with an innate fascination to meet locals and deepen his understanding of the world. From his very early days studying at Adelaide University in Australia, and then living with his young family in Holland, and his frequent visits to Australia, he traveled the world and absolutely enjoyed meeting and greeting along the way. He loved nature and wildlife and truly appreciated the natural beauty of the world. My auntie Renuka sent me this picture in the lower right-hand corner, which was recently taken of him before he passed, where he requested to watch the sunset. It was a natural phenomenon that he was very encapsulated by. It was one of his favorite pastimes each day. As you all know, my grandfather was the recipient of many prestigious awards and was granted the highest national honours in Sri Lanka. So in 1986, he was one of the first recipients of the Vidya Jyoti Sri Lankan National Honour, awarded for outstanding scientific and technological achievements. And in 1988, he received the Deshamana, second highest national civil order for Sri Lanka for highly meritorious service. We're incredibly proud that his scientific contributions were nationally recognised at this level. And just to end, I really wanted to share with you all that for all of his accomplishments, awards, adventures, my grandfather still truly cared for his family and colleagues and friends. He treated everyone that he met as an equal. He had no sense of ego or arrogance, and he was deeply respectful and a very dignified man. He was very happy to live a simple and comfortable life with a gratitude for everything that he had and a selfless spirit to give his time, his energy, his intellect, his research, and all of his contributions to the greater good of science and to serve his country, and which he did with immense pride, fulfillment, and success over the 97 years of his life. So just in closing, I wanted to say that my grandfather, he will be very missed. He will always be deeply respected and fondly remembered for his intellect, his influence, his accomplishments, his charms, and his wit. And in closing, on behalf of my family, I'd like to thank the Rakaganno Tree Society of Sri Lanka for inviting us to share a personal side of our grandfather's life, and for organising this event to celebrate his life. And yeah, thank you once again.
Thank you, Shalini. It was very going down memory lane to listen to all these stories and the pictures. I wish I knew him personally from what I've heard of what was related by Bhathiya and yourself. So thank you once again, and a very sincere apology once again for the intrusion at the start. And we had to then not allow people without any known name to come into the Bhathiya, to the Zoom talk. So that also is unfortunate. But we do have a recording which we will share with Ajit Kobekado, who can share with all rest of the family. So before we conclude, I would like now to ask Ayesha to propose the vote of thanks. And after that, Ayesha, please show us the slideshow again and those wonderful pictures and the show which Secretary Shirani Balasurya made. Thank you very much and a very good night. And my apologies once again for the intrusion. Ayesha?
Thank you, Dushi. We also do have a question in the chat from Ranmal
Okay.
van der Poorten, who has asked, where can we get a copy of the soil map?
Bhathiya, Dr. Bhathiya?
Yeah. Well, they used to be available at the Department of Agriculture, but later I learned it's not available anymore. But I'll look for it. But of course, it is available on the internet. If you look for soil map for Sri Lanka, it is there.
Yes.
And I think you can download it.
Yes.
That's the only sure way of getting it, I think.
Yes. One question from me, Bhathiya,
Yeah.
Dr. Bhathiya, is the sweetness of the fruits. How
Yeah.
does the soil affect the sweetness of a fruit?
It is the temperature that settles down the sugar that is manufactured by the fruit, right? By the plant, for that matter,
Right.
is deposited in the fruit. Now, due to the night and day temperature difference in this IL2 area, he discovered that they deposit more sugar in those areas.
Okay.
Right? So IL2 area, I in my presentation, I pronounce those areas.
Yeah.
So Padiya Talava onwards, that dry zone belt up to Kantale, Polonnaru, that area. So
Right.
fruits from there, we know that even in the dry zone, if you buy a papaya, it's tastier in Jaffna and Anuradhapura than in Kandy. You see, or that, for that matter, in Colombo. So
Yes.
that kind of thing. So this day and night temperature difference has been, he recognized that that has a major role to play in their sweetness.
Okay.
I hope
Thank
that explained what you wanted.
Yeah, I think, yes, indeed, because Ajit Kobekado also will agree with me that
Right.
even in the tea industry,
Yes.
when the weather is dry and
Yes.
the tea bush is under stress, it
Yes.
brings out quality in the product.
Right.
So thank you then, and I will now ask Ayesha to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dushi. So first of all, we would like to express a very warm thank you to Dr. Bhathiya Sumithraarachchi, who took time from his very busy schedule to share his valuable insights with all of us about a great human being. So thank you so much for your delightful presentation. Also, we really appreciate the sentiments of Shalini Lawson, whose words about her beloved grandfather touched our hearts down to the very personalized details like his love of stationery. Today would also not have been possible without the hard work of the Rakaganno committee led by Dushi and Shirani, both of whom work passionately to make these events possible. Thank you to Gayatri, who designed the delightful poster for the event, and Sada, who provided the conferencing facilities, as well as to the family and the friends of Dr. Panabokke and the members of Rakaganno. And finally, we would like to thank all of you for being a wonderful audience, and we really value your participation and hope to see you again at the next Rakaganno event. So thank you, and back to you, Dushi.
Okay, thank you, Ayesha. That was very appropriate and apt. So we will end up with playing that slideshow back again and listening to the Nightingale Serenade. Good night.
Good night.
you.